Afternoon everyone, so I put bright yellow on to try and keep you all awake, so apologies if it's a little bit bright, but hoping that it'll just wake us all up a bit. The reason I got given this title as well, I think Tony made a good point, is that sometimes as practitioners and sports scientists we tend to oversell ourselves, sometimes do things that we shouldn't do, and I think this whole concept of injury prevention, I know it's a commonly used term, but for me that just sums it up. We're already advertising that we can prevent injury. And I think, and again, the first slide that I'm going to show you is 3 situations like within our pre-season. So these are all pre-season games, and I've highlighted the still pictures of where the injuries are. So I'm hoping these videos work. So first injury, this is 44 minutes into the first game. Player was not due to play this game, but went in for a tackle, contact injury, then out for 6 weeks. Okay, so next one. This is, again, second pre-season game. So player gets backed into by a striker, hyperextends his knee, similar to how Ibrahimovic's knee looked, out for 2 months. And then the last one, which this is actually 2 minutes into the first game of pre-season, and dislocated patella with a load of other issues around the knee, out for the full season. So he's actually just had his first session back out onto the pitch last Friday with us as well. So all of a sudden there's 3 instances there that we had within pre-season where we're like, could we have actually stopped those injuries? Could we prevent them? So everything that we try and do, we promote as like reducing the risk of injury. So injury risk management, as some of the other guys have mentioned today. And I think it's important that we just keep assessing our terminology with coaching staff to make sure that we're not overselling the product that we're doing. And it's important that you keep the aims of what you're actually here for clear. And that's one thing that we do. So preparing the team for the Premier League, regardless of whether we're in the Championship next season. I'm glad Johnny's gone now because I'm hoping that we stay up above Swansea. Regardless of whether we're in the Championship or the Premier League, we prefer our team to be competing in the Premier League. We want to be the top level of the Championship if we're in the Championship and get promoted, but we also want to be a Premier League team. That's the main objective. And we also try and do that by promoting best practice on an individual level. Matt mentioned a lot of good work that the Leicester guys are doing and throughout the day, and really the individual aspect is where we're trying to take our programme. It's become whereby it's a team sport and everyone has to be together as a team, but each individual is different to us. So a lot of the analysis that we do and the focus is on an individual level now. And again, I'm going to brush over some of the things within this presentation because I know you've heard about them already today. But actually educating players is really important. We do a sub-max 5-minute bike test every morning for heart rate variability. And during that time, they have to do set exercise time, but we actually use that time just to give a quick 5-minute brief presentation, probably once every couple of weeks. Whether it be nutrition, whether it be, we had a hygiene one this week for the players. And it's also about monitoring and looking after yourself. So I'm hoping that if by next weekend we're safe, touch wood, then the following week we can do an off-season presentation and education session, okay? And each individual will get specific off-season programming. And it's all about educating on why to do it. You take responsibility as an individual. It's not us that we're trying to get our job's worth out of it. We're doing this to better you. And it's been an interesting season for us. So the last 3 seasons, other than this season, we had the same manager, consistent club, consistent staff. This season we've had 3 managers throughout the course of the season. The first one leaving within 3 weeks of pre-season, which was interesting. And the most important thing as a department that we try and do is provide a service to the manager and coaching staff in order to win the game on a Saturday. And I think that's sometimes what we get caught up and we forget about. We all go, oh, we need to be monitoring the load and that. We need to be looking at these injury risk strategies and so on. But it's like, well, what is going to help us win the game on a Saturday? Is there a risk element to it? And that's for the manager and ourselves to decide. If a player is returning from an injury, okay, let's have a balancing act. What's the risk of him reoccurring that injury compared to the risk of him actually helping us get 3 points on the weekend, which as Hull City in the Premier League, we don't get many times where we get 3 points in a game. So we've got to be really, it's true though. So we've got to be really careful with how we manage it. And again, apologies, the laptop's a little bit slow. A gust of wind decided to take it off the table when we were doing real time. And when you look closely at it, you'll see black tape all around it. So it's going a little bit slower than what I'd like. So some of the key strategies that we use at Hull, and I'll just brush over some of these, but strength conditioning's been a really big improvement for us this year. We had a new S&C coach coming in November who's been brilliant for us, superb, and really helped us educate the players better with S&C provision. So we've got a lot of buy-in from that. Recovery, regeneration, and I'm not going to talk through them all, but I think a couple of the key ones at the bottom is actually communicating within a staffing structure, and that is really important in order to get the messages across, not just to the players, but to the manager, the coaching staff, and within your multidisciplinary teams. But the main one, again, we're at Catapult conference, and we've all got a vested interest within monitoring systems, how we can improve it. So the main focus where I'm going to take it today is towards how we actually monitor and test the physical capabilities of our players and how we can actually use that to look at the risk of injury. And there we go, it's going a little bit slow again. So a couple of strategies that we use. Now, I wanted to mention this, and I'm not expecting to read all those papers and squint at them, but just a brief overview, there's been a lot of the acute chronic. We've had it mentioned throughout a couple of the presentations there from Ed, from Matt, and so on. And we seem to be within a culture where as sports scientists, as practitioners, we tend to jump on the next thing quite quickly without asking questions of it. And I'm like, again, the acute chronic's great, and there's been some good work by people within this room on it as well. But we just have to be careful of the levels that we take it on for granted, and we can't be pulling players, like Tony mentioned in the very first talk this morning, can't be pulling players out of training just because they're at high risk of injury. So this is an example, and again, we do it, so I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we actually go, here's a few variables, so volume measures, look at your loading parameters, so from a stress point of view. High intensity actions are just your combination of XLs, decels and high speed running efforts. Your session RPE, which we actually use differential RPE for rather than traditional method, and then looking at sprint output as well. Now, according to this, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 players who are over that 10% injury risk threshold for a given week, okay? Not one of them got injured that week, or the following week, or within the following 4-week period. So already we've got false positives coming out. And that's where, but if we'd have tried to pull any of those out of the game or training, then we're actually doing an injustice to the player. One, because they're capable of playing the game. We don't know the limits, and what I tend to see with this, and again, I'm sure everyone's got their own anecdotal opinions on this, is that it depends on the individual player. Are they robust? And when you go back to some, Matt mentioned about Jan Ekstrand's work, you look at the very beginning of what we say causes injury risk. You've got your age, so players over 30 are more prone to injury risk than most of the young players. You've got your previous history of injury, and you've got a change in manager. Obviously, we had 3 changes in manager this season, so that's probably where this will go towards later on. And it's just really being careful about specific injuries as well. Like, is it an injury risk for someone to have a knee injury when they've done too much sprinting? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. So we just have to be careful of like what we're using, and I think it's got to be individual specific, but also each individual might have a different variable that is more related to their potential injury risk as well. I know the guys at Southampton, Laura, did some good work within their team, look at the acceleration to deceleration work as well. But what works for one team and one player might not work for everyone within this room, so we've got to be specific. And again, different positions as well, looking at some of Anthony's work. So what we tended to do is with some of this data, so there's 4 different things on the sheet, and if this works, there we go, need to switch on. So what we've got up here is this is each individual's game. So just to show an example of how we actually view the data. And within here, we put the average line, the set and limitation. So if it goes out of the coefficient of variation, as we see down here below, we set different thresholds for each individual player, depending on, one, how much data have we previously got. So based upon their match day -2, for example, most of these reds are games within here. But if it's a significant match day -2, for example, it will go red even though it's not as high. So this one is an example of that as well. And this basically down here, again, apologies for squinting, but that's based upon session RPE as well from differential RPE. So we've got that, and that highlights. So this is one graph across the course of the season for each individual player, and we split it up into, again, we're still looking at how the previous manager used language to describe his training sessions. So we have the extensive variables out here, so your big pitch, your 11v11 kind of spaces, so which we tend to prescribe, okay, if that's your aims for today, here's specific variables for that. So we try and be variable specific for the day. And we look at high speed running, sprinting distance, and then repeated high intensity efforts as well. Now, we still look at the rest of the variables within the context of it, but part of the education towards the coaching staff was, well, if you're playing your big pitches and you want big days, are you actually getting the output from the week? So for us, if we were doing an extensive day, as defined by the coaching staff, and this happened under the previous manager across some of the seasons, we never actually hit the speed output. So we didn't get that max speed, so above 90% max velocity. We weren't hitting that target too much. So that was one of our educations, pushing the manager in the right direction, the coaching staff to say, right, either can we do some top-ups with the players to help, one, if they got to sprint in a game, they should be sprinting in training to prepare them. So can we do top-ups, or can we manipulate the session to incorporate that? And actually there's some really good creative sessions and drills put on by the coaching staff, so there was a really good counter-attacking principle. So even on like days now, Marco and his staff actually do this really well, is that we might work on a match day -3, doing shape and set pieces, but actually it breaks out with a counter-attack. So you're working on specific tactical work that's related to the Saturday game, but then you have your extensive output and your conditioning variables, but it all fits within the 11v11 and that tactical periodization model, so to speak, which we're still learning about as a group of practitioners within the club. And we're still working with the coaching staff about what they want to be able to achieve, because it's not just a one-day sat-down meeting, what do you want to do, this is how we're going to do it, okay, that's where we go. It's a long-term process. What we've then done is use like, oh, there we go, I've broken that, sorry. A linear mix model and incorporated a spline model within that to then fit for each individual player. So these are like, again, the 6 variables here. So we've got your sprinting injury risk, your high speed running injury risk, total distance covered, high intensity actions, your player load, and your session RPE derived from the differential RPE. And what we do, so the more data we have on an individual player, the smarter the models can become. And what you tend to see, and it was really interesting for us when we actually plotted it and looked at it, and we went, well, actually, for each one of these 6 variables, you've got slightly different patterns. The only 2, so the high intensity actions and high speed running actions in training, are the only 2 that really look similar and actually have, when you actually break down the numbers of the spline model, actually look as though they're along the same line. So you get a little, as Tim Gabbett would refer it to, as a little sweet spot, and then you get this exponential increase in risk of injury depending on the more you do. But actually when we look at distance covered, the volume doesn't necessarily cover it, and we've got some outliers here as well where the risk has gone up but nothing's happened. And actually for this player, he's only been injured once during 2 seasons of being with us. So we've not got a lot of injury data to go off, so it's using those predictions of injury to help us estimate it. So this is still an estimation, but we're trying to be smarter within the data that we use. And again, where's the sprint one? There we go. So, and you can see we try and keep within the spline model for each individual. So if we do increase it, actually, are we being progressive with that increase so it's not an injury risk? And the guys have talked about change today, and I think that's one of the biggest indicators of risk for me is the change. And when we actually break down the stats, we've got a high number of our injuries occur 2 to 3 weeks after the international break. So when you get players returning back, so it might be the first week, second week, third week, within that time frame. So when you look at that 4-week period, they're breaking down if they do break down. So that's why it's important for us to actually communicate with international staff and the players while they're away to make sure that we try and keep this up to date as possible to help us be smarter about it. And again, just going on that individual level as well. So this is actually from a paper that we've got under review at the minute, and this is looking at each individual's differential RP. So differential RP basically splits down your leg soreness, your breathlessness, your technical, tactical RP. So we've actually been educating the players to split that down throughout the season. This is actually done after every Premier League game this season so far. And the reason why I put this on is not just for self-advertisement, but it's more to just show, actually, this is an individual who actually, from a breathlessness, doesn't actually find the game too hard. From a leg soreness point of view, okay, it's a little bit hard, but actually technically and tactically, it's more demanding on him. And we wouldn't have known that without splitting up the RP. I'm sure guys in the room, when you do RP after a game, oh, it's an 8, it's 9. Your goalkeeper might be 4, 3, 4, so on. But actually, we've got a lot more useful information on an individual level by splitting it down. And you see here, there's not many players that actually look the same or have the same variable throughout. And there's so much noise within this. It's actually a good thing for us because the players are being more sensitive with how they find the game as well. And when we marry that up with the physical data that we get as well, we're starting to see some really good relationships and trends and patterns occurring within the games. So when we actually use that within training, again, I'll just flick over that, that's what I said already, but it's really important that, one, you base it on an individual level. That's how, again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but we've found a lot better buy-in from players and coaching staff when we discuss it on an individual level. And sometimes not just the linear mix modelling, but some of the inferential statistics, so Will Hopkins stuff, has actually been more sensitive for us to not predict injury risk, but actually look at the risk of injury towards a player as well. Okay? And then you get on the other side, so that's how we help to monitor our fit players and how we help to look at the injury risk reduction strategies from a monitoring point of view. Now, when we've got players who are available and unavailable, we do a couple of different things. So this is an example of a rehab report that I put up now, and this is a 2-page document whereby with every report we do, we try and cater towards the individual person that's going to read it. So not just necessarily the manager or the players. So this is a different report, so it's completely different to the reports you see on there. This is for the rehab fitness coach and the physios because they want that information and done in a certain way. So what we've got up here is you've got each individual variable. So it might be heart rate outputs, you might be max velocity. So we look at individual speed thresholds and absolute speed thresholds to help us quantify a player returning from injury. So we do that not just on an absolute level, but also a relative level. So what percentage of that in compared to what they are capable of. Now, that might actually come from a game. It might come from a training session. Sometimes we train harder in our training sessions than what we do in our game. So we have to be aware of what is that player's physical capacity. Are we actually helping them meet those requirements and getting back to those demands again? So within here, we just split these into volume and intensity. Again, different person, different language. Our rehab fitness coach is Spanish, and this is how he's always communicated. So he's trying to make the report as comfortable for him to understand as possible. And then we take the actual visual graph and the IMA output, we use the visuals, and this is a really important one for not just the rehab fitness coach when we're looking at certain mechanics and directions of the movement. Now I know, like I really like IMA, and it's when you actually look at the direction of movement, I think that's a lot more important than necessarily the intensity of it. But it gives an idea of, are they still compensating for movement in a specific plane? We're working on the minute at looking at some of the accelerometer and gyroscope data as well within linear and continuous running to see if we can identify and be smarter within our interpretation where players are at from a mechanical perspective. And that's from a rehabilitation point of view and return to play report. But actually, when we look at testing, so we use a submax, and when I say it's submax, it's probably a little bit more than submax yo-yo test, because we use the IR2 and we take it up to level 20.8, and it's quite a high level. And when we did the maximal test, so we've done maximal yo-yo testing for the past 2 seasons, took the average of the lowest scores and then looked at the heart rate data and looked at the heart rate deflection point. And basically, wherever that heart rate deflection point for the average lowest person, we took it back to that level. So that's why we decided to do 20.8, because we wanted to really use it as a conditioning session as well as a submaximal test from our point of view. Because if we only get an opportunity to do it once every mesocycle, we wanted to try and get a bit more value than just looking at doing it once every week and continuous runs. That's what the heart rate data for on the bikes is for on the bikes. Can't speak properly, sorry. And I'm actually going to go through a little bit more detail on this individual player on a couple of slides further along. But this is basically looking at the play loading. So again, look at the movement efficiency during the same test. Kept the ground the same, boots the same. So everything was controlled that we could control within a practical element. And you see here there's actually a progressive deload. So this is the start of preseason in 2015. Comes down in the next mesocycle, down even further during the next one, and so on. And then it's gone slightly up. But the thing for us that we were happy with when this player looked at his off-season program, and I'll show you the example of it later on, like I said, is that he didn't go up as high within his mechanical inefficiency, so to speak. He stayed just as efficient. So it meant that he wasn't as high a risk of injury coming back into training during the pre-season cycle of 2016. And then, while even though mechanically he's fine, actually from a cardiovascular point of view, which we don't mind, because if your players are as fit as they can be at the start of pre-season, then what are you going to work on and how are you going to make sure they're peaking at the right time during the season? This was where we saw a nice little trend, and this player had quite a bit of work to do. That's why, again, you see a gradual improvement within this. And again, what has happened from a mechanical point of view, and on the far graph, basically you've got your anterior-posterior accelerations in the green, you've got your medial lateral, so the player load sideways in the blue, and then you've got your player load up, stroke vertical plane in the orange. And when you actually look at the numbers now, for us, when we do this testing, you're looking at about a noise of 0.8% for it to be a significant change. And when you actually look at the vertical, you can see that gradually he drops down. So he's actually shifted the way that he's loading through his body now. And it was interesting to us. So this is done on an individual level for each individual player. And it allows us to have conversations with physio, medical staff accordingly to make sure that, one, is there any issues that you've seen or you felt on the bed from a clinical perspective that could inform this information as well? And we keep doing this throughout the season to make sure that, one, we're being smart with how we're prescribing players training, not just to the coaches, but also within our gym programs and so on. And we do this on a real-time basis as well. So while we're conscious of the time between download data, the real-time data that the Catapult guys provide is really good. Like, we had a paper published on it earlier this year just showing that is actually accurate and reliable, which I was surprised when doing the in-house testing it started off originally, that there was only one technical report done on it. And a lot of the work has come as well. I've got to thank Ed, Matt and TJ in the room, and is Schmeagel still here? No, he's not. So Rob Hayworth as well. I think collaboration is really important within the practical environment. And this study over here actually helps inform some of this submax yo-yo testing for us. And while it was on game data and it was a big collaborative project, you get to find out a little bit more about individuals. Now, we didn't know any of the players' names, so it was all anonymous within the testing, but it worked really well for us, and we all learnt a little bit from it. I hope anyway. Matt, did we? Or yeah, he's nodded his head. I think he's just being polite. So, and that's basically how we monitor and how we use that as part of an injury risk strategy. Now, I'll go through most of this, but I thought to finish it off just nicely would give you a practical example of the pre-season, how it's come to fruition, because for those of you that don't know, it was a really interesting pre-season at Hull. Like I said, 3 managers in 1 season. It's been a really interesting challenge for us. Now, you go through all these procedures of, right, well, let's plan the pre-season. So players have an off-season programme. That's the very first stage of planning the pre-season, is what is the off-season lead up to it. Okay, if we know the date of the pre-season, how do we gradually build them up? Like Matt was saying during his programme, and this is just an example programme of what individuals will get. So you go through your blue days, green days, red days, light, moderate, heavy. For some reason, our coaching staff don't like the traffic light system, so we have to use blue, green and red. That's the only reason for those colours, by the way. But it's still allowing them time to, one, have a recovery and taper period off from the season, so actually allow the bodies to regenerate and so on, and progressively increase load and intensity throughout it so they're ready. Because even the club has philosophy, basically, no one comes back before July. And so, depending on when our season finishes, so like this season, we'll finish our season on 21st of May, and other than long-term injuries, everyone else is off. So you have some players that go on international breaks, which this will be different for. You have some players that will have 5-6 weeks off. So each one will get an individual programme depending on their schedule during the off-season. And we try and make sure that they're in a good a state as possible, not to make it such a big shock or change to the system when they arrive. So it's that. But we also want adaptation, so we need to give them a little bit of shock during pre-season. That's why it's there at the end of the day, as part of the training programme. And during the off-season, what we actually do, so this programme's here, but we actually provide our services. Now, I think our performance director's been quite smart with this. The club book out like a villa in Portugal for 3 weeks, and basically players can come on holiday there, train with us for an hour, 2 hours in the morning, then they've got the rest of the time off. So, and that allows us to get a little bit of contact time with the players, check that they're doing the programmes. It gives them no excuses really that they can't do it. There's then staff working at Hull. There's then other locations. So if a player rings us up and says, can I do a session? Yep, where do you want to meet? That's the kind of service we're trying to provide now on an individual level. And this was the player I was talking about. So the Submax data where the player actually made that big improvement. This is the front cover for them, and he doesn't look like this. He has got a nose as well. But we've basically got total distance covered and their maximal values for the season. And so the link there for him to fill out is RPE during the season. Again, that was starting to educate them on the differential RPE as well, because they'd not just had to fill out overall, but also legs, breathlessness, mental, tactical side of it as well. But we also give him aims to come back to as well. So he had really good skin fold scores, but there was a few movement things that he had to work on, and he knew that, and that was where some of the exercise in here, now the background, this generic one, he had some more specific details on his green and red days it was for this player. So again, trying to be as individual specific as possible within our planning for pre-season. That's the overview of our pre-season as well. So you've got day one. Now the old manager, so this season will be the first season where we actually get to spend a week in England first before we fly away. Traditionally, we've always literally met up, travelled straight out to Portugal for 14 days. That's how the pre-season went. We came back and then we had 2 games. So it's an overview. Red is, again, there's smaller details in there, so when they send around the actual presentations, you'll be able to read in that, but it's got a mixture of games and so on. But what we do over here is we actually give the visual to the coaching staff and say, look, this is what we recommend, and for you to get what you want out of it, and this was to the old coaching staff, so then we had an issue when halfway through pre-season they left. This is what you want to get out of pre-season. Here's the way to get the players from a physical point of view, what you want them to do in a game next season. This is how we would best advise to do it. Now, there is simple language, extensive high on a red day. So I look over here, okay, so day 5, extensive. It's a rating 8 out of 10. So he's trying to give the coaches that little bit more details, and then we go more specific, go, right, what kind of example content would we expect to see? So with all the categorization of drills and breaking down periods and that, we actually created a drill library for the coaches. So linking in the physical activity to the session designs. So like you can see here, so these are, we didn't put the actual numbers in because this is a plan. We don't know if the numbers are going to match what they will, but we give an example session here, the content of the day, the example area sizes, and then hopefully the output from that drill. And this is how we help the coach prescribe it. So like position specific 15 on 15 off running, that's what we expect from when we've done it previously. So it just gives the coaches an idea of what to do. We're not saying do this, do that. It's like, you've done this before. This is really, really good. This is what would really help you to do it. And the coaches bought into it, which we really like. They all had a dossier of these kind of drills. So again, we have the first week there, second week here, where we're starting to get into a few more small-sided games, a bit more tactical work, but also allowing for that little bit of fun, technical stroke recovery days as well, but still getting a little bit of work in. And then progressing on to the third week, where we start to see a few more games kicking in and starting to maintain that little bit of volume, but also try and get the intensity out of it. So we use the dribble track probably once each week, just as a challenge for the players, not just from a physical point of view, but from a mental point of view, in order to get through it. And a lot of them really struggle with the mental side of just going 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off. So the coaches really liked it, and they found it as a mental task, and we saw it as like a cardiovascular output, but also still getting some good work out of the players. And depending on how quick this laptop goes, there we go. And this is our pre-season in action. So you can tell now, I'll just play them all at once so we loop through them and just give you an example. So just an example of the sub-max yo-yo test that we do. We had a trialist on there who you can probably tell when the video keeps playing that he was a mile behind, but the manager had him at an old club, so he stayed with us for most of pre-season. Then we've got the gym exercises, a little bit of ball work within here. Again, some of the gym work is laughable, but you deal with the facilities that you've got. And some of the main content within the sessions here, so this one was a technical tactical drill that the coaches wanted to do, but we actually gave it a physical output as well, whereby there's gradual build up to the play, cross into the box, and as soon as he scores, so small shooting, right, you got to sprint back past the halfway line. So incorporating the crossing and finishing drill that the coaches wanted to do with a physical element towards the end of it, and it's that disguised running that we all tried to achieve as well. So players should sprint straight away. It's also a good workout for the keepers. Again, I know Anthony mentioned it today, and I'm sure you might look at it thinking, I wonder how many dives they're doing. But this was the way that the goalkeeper coach saw a good conditioning way for them to be a part of the team, and also, well, sometimes they just can't save the 2-yard shots out. We then got the pre-activation exercises, which we did group sessions out there. We also made sure that we were hitting individual aspects as well. So there was a group session, but within that tent that you might have saw behind, we were doing the individual work as well prior to that. And within this bottom left-hand corner, again, while we try and keep it football specific in that, we also like the fact that we have to break it down and take it into the movement. So you've got your 20 metres by 10 metre accelerations and decelerations. So trying to hit those high accelerations to high decelerations within frontal plane. A progression, so 2 days later we'd then do it side on and so on. So you can see the different movements now coming within there. But again, it keeps going back to someone tying the boots. So all these different drills and different experiences that players go throughout, we're trying to make sure that they're prepared for the game and prepared to win the first game of the season. That's our objective. There we go. And I don't know how many people in this room have had the experience of having a Mr. Vahayan comment on their team. He likes to comment on a lot of teams. But this was a tweet that we got after Steve Bruce resigned from us. So I think it was 3.5 weeks into pre-season. Steve handed his resignation. He wasn't getting a transfer kitty, basically. What do we do now? because the club actually then sacked 2 of his backroom staff straight away. So there was an assistant manager, first team coach and a goalkeeper coach. So we were asked to provide quite a lot of support during that programme. And even though it says on here he's only got 13 fit players, actually and Twitter and social media is great. I don't know if any of you saw this picture. This is something that Curtis Davis posted on his Twitter. And this was our squad photo for the new season. So players are great, as Tony said earlier as well. So, and you look at it and you go, oh, well, that's brilliant. Yeah, we've only got 9 players. And it was 9 senior players. But when you actually break it down, so at the start of the season, we had 18 senior players signed onto the books. We had a few leave during the off-season and so on. During our pre-season, we sold 1 player, so when we were short of players, the club thought it was a good idea to sell a player to Newcastle. We had the 3 contact injuries, which you saw in the second slide of today. We had 2 long-term injuries from the previous season. We had 2 players who were unable to travel because of the numbers. It was that whole risk-reward kind of balance. It's like if they go out and play, because we had 2 games in Austria to do in the week, and it was like, well, if you play them in that game, you're potentially running a high risk that they're not going to be available for the Premier League game. So we had 2 unable to travel to Austria because they were back in Hull getting specific work done for little niggles that they had. And then the final player was taking the photo. So all of a sudden we get this kind of stuff coming out on social media, and I think this is where as a sports science community and practitioners community, I think there's only him that really voices this kind of opinion, but we've got to be fully understanding of the situation there. And again, I apologise to Matt and TJ about this in advance, but one of the objectives that we had at the start of the season, which you saw in the aims, was to prepare a team to compete in the Premier League and try and get 3 points on Saturday. And it was interesting looking at Matt's, and I've spoken to TJ about the pre-season before, where you saw the match minutes of the Leicester City guys, and we actually said this before this game actually, some of our players had done 460 odd minutes in pre-season. Like, we had 5 players, because of the number of contact injuries we got and the number of players we had within the squad, we weren't able to utilise a squad to rotate. So we had Sam Clucas and Curtis Davis played every minute of every pre-season game. So when people say there's a progressive lead up into pre-season, you do 45 minutes here, 45 minutes, then 60 and so on and so on. I think Sam has played every game of the season. He's our outlier. And we all look at stats and try and, like Tony said, we want to predict things, but Sam is an outlier. He's played every minute of every game he's been available for. The only time I think he's missed a game is suspension or like through non-selection. And he's probably been one of our best players so far this season. And this is a lad we talk about increasing the level of intensity. I know Ed mentioned about the age groups coming up. This lad's gone from conference football to League 2, to League 1, to Championship, to then Premiership in consecutive seasons. And he's able to cope with the demands of that. And has it been a progressive increase? I don't know. I haven't got that data from League 1, League 2 and so on. But I think sometimes we're too quick to jump on these things, and there's always going to be an outlier within our environment. And come on, there we go. And while we've had some success, I think it's been a turbulent season. I've focused on the pre-season, but it's always good to look at actually what happened, because again, we asked the question of ourselves, actually, because we had such a small squad and the players played every game of pre-season, did it prepare them better for the first couple of games of the season? Yes. What were the long-term implications of that? Don't know. When you've got older players playing more games, they become higher risk of injury, as we know. And we still get these contact injuries that we could do nothing about. I'm sure you've all seen Ryan Mason's head injury when Gary Cahill and him went up for a header. He's got a fractured skull now. So we've got a few of the other things. Dislocated shoulder again. Could we have done anything better? Maybe, but the player's got no previous history, does all his gym work. And this was just, that's why I'm a bit speechless really about it, because there's some things you can explain, some things you can't. And I found like the more I learn, the less I think I know. And I think that's really important, that I keep challenging myself and keep asking questions, and we all do it. The more you know, the more you challenge yourself and go, do I actually know this? And you can see here like the big change we had as a club. 3 managers in 1 season. We had 14 new signings. We've had a couple go out on loan. I know there's a few of the lads out on loan at guys that are in the clubs, which I need to catch up with. And we had 3 changes of management. So the big one was Marco. When Marco came in as well, just to touch base on that, Marco actually wanted to introduce a high pressing style of play, which if you watch any of the Premier League games, it's where probably we've had a bit of success. And even though we actually planned and sat down with Marco and his coaching staff about progressive increase in load, you're still going to get 1 or 2 players that can't cope with those demands. And going back to Jan Ekstrand, experience through age of players, if you're over 30, you're more high risk of injury. Funnily enough, during this transitional period, even though we tried to increase it gradually, the over 30s really struggled with it. And we're on the other side of it now, where actually, other than the long-term injuries and the contact injuries, we're quite low on injuries at the minute, touch wood and all that. So we're on the other side of it now. We're doing some of the biggest training sessions like I've seen even from previous jobs and that. So like as a sample on Tuesday, we had a player go through a player load of 1,100, which is 97% of his maximum output, which was done through going through 10,500 metres, like 400 metre high speed running with 200 of that sprinting as well. So all of a sudden we're working harder and the players are actually becoming more robust. So, but it's taken that transitional period for them to get used to that. At the end of the day, whatever he wants to do with his team, we have to try and help him achieve that with the players we've got and help him understand this player. We need to gradually do that. Some players, they're fine. They'll cope with it fine. And the thing is, recruitment side of it as well, recruitment helps massively. We changed the way we play, and again, I look through the TrackAb system and the Premier League deal as well, look at all the physical data from the Premier League. And some of our physical output when Marco first came in is some of the highest I've seen in the Premier League this season. And I'm not just saying that because we're here. Like, we had Middlesbrough as a team collectively do 120 kilometres running against us. When Marco first came in, we had 3 games that were all close to 120 kilometres as a team, which on an average as a team doing 108 kilometres, that's a big, big increase and big demands on the game, especially considering in January and February we had 15 games because we were in the League Cup semi-final. We had FA Cup to contend with, so we worked out that we had a game every 3.1 days within those 2 months. And we came out on the other side of it, and we'll see whether or not we actually keep our Premier League status coming up as well. But as a department and as a group of sports scientists or practitioners, we need to keep in mind that we're here to support the manager and the coaching staff and the club. So we have the best interest of everyone at heart, but as long as we aim to achieve that 3-point win on a Saturday, that is the main thing that the club is in the business for. Winning trophies, winning points is everything that the club wants to do as a business. And we have to keep that in the back of the mind. And obviously, it's not just me that does it, it's all the team and the members of staff and the new members of staff as well. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask. Apologies if I kept you over 4 o'clock as well.
Yeah, just interested to hear about the distances you said the team hit earlier in the week. Do you think that's a positive thing in the long run if the squad can be staying injury free, winning games at the weekend and hitting that big distance in the week leading into the game?
It's an interesting one because I think some players will cope with it fine and come out the better side of it, some players won't. So the players that are hitting those kind of distances now, and it's not just about distance for us, that was just an example, but it's about how players can tolerate it. And Matt made a good point about like the 3-game weeks and so on, and we had a lot of that in January and February. So even now when we're training, if we carry on that into the new season, if we're doing that kind of distance, that kind of volume and intensity during the week, then when it comes to 2-game weeks, we'll be better prepared as well. Because if you're doing that kind of volume, it's not a shock to your body to go straight to 2-game weeks as well. So I think it's good for some players, but can be detrimental to other players. I know that's sitting on the fence a little bit, but each individual is different. No? Cool. Done? Yeah, awesome. Happy? Cheers.